Hi everyone, Freethany Throtano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for another YUNOREVIEW, where I go over a series of records that dropped really over the past couple of months at this point, and I review them gauntlet style with short opinions, just very brief thoughts on all of them, and yeah, you know, just sharing my ideas and vibes on some of these records that I wasn't able to give a full-length review to because of time and, you know, other stuff that I was focusing on with other releases and reviews. But yeah, that's it. So now that you know what we're in for here, let's go ahead and do it. This is the second full-length album from this Australian pop artist, which, given some of the singles in the lead-up, I was highly anticipating. Some of the throwback vibes on these songs were done incredibly well. Really some of the best shoegaze-style production I've heard in a while. Plus, there are moments on this thing that uniquely fuse that with dream pop and alternative dance. But with that being said, as I dived deeper into the record itself, I found a lot of the songwriting and vocal performances to be very hit or miss or kind of limp. This record truly is supremely bland at points, but generally I will say it does a good job of bringing back the 90s. If this is your sound, if this is your vibe, this 90s nostalgia thing, I highly recommend checking this out because there are great highlights. Coi Leray, Trendsetter, went into this album with high hopes, especially given the viral success of tracks like Twin and also some of the very important industry crossovers that she bagged on this one, like with Nicki Minaj. This project was supposed to be a very big moment for Coi, but the numbers ended up pretty much tanking, and I think the quality of the record wasn't really there either. Because across this project, I hear a lot of different styles, I hear a lot of different beats, I hear a lot of different features, but the last thing I really hear, the last thing my mind is drawn to oftentimes is Coi Leray herself, often because her performances or lyrics are subpar. She often finds herself bending over backwards to complement the vibe of another artist who she's having on as a guest, or just generally entering into a sound and a vibe that may not play to her strengths. And she does this despite the fact that, like, the answer here is obvious. Like, give us the cute, viral, somewhat left-field, tongue-in-cheek little bangers that have made you such a viral success on platforms like TikTok. Like, obviously, you don't gotta pigeonhole yourself or anything like that, but I figured that we'd get at least, like, you know, a handful more cuts that were kind of scratching that same itch that Twin was. And yeah, I'm just kind of surprised. Not only did she refuse to flex that side of herself a bit more, but I think generally on this thing, she doesn't really play to her strengths. New project here from Bathing Apes Nigo, essentially playing DJ Khaled, but not annoying on this project, using his various connections in the music world via fashion to assemble together a bunch of rappers that he likes and knows, beats and producers to just kind of make these one-off tracks that run pretty much like a compilation. There are some duds here, there are some really subpar tracks, and again, given that it's compiled in the way that it is, it doesn't exactly come across cohesive. Plus, the guest list across this thing isn't exactly long, so it's not like you're hearing from a ton of different voices across the entire thing. But still, there are some very good highlights and performances here from guys like ASAP and Tyler, the Creator, and Pusha T, and that alone makes this thing worth trying out, just to hear those spare moments from those artists doing cool stuff on the side from what they're doing with their main project. So yeah, it's not bad. It's worth a listen. It's a bit of a curiosity, but feels mostly like just a compilation, a pile of tracks that have just kind of happened to be pulled together by this dude who also cares about music as well as fashion. Some sweet Australian psych here on this new Psychedelic Porn Crumpets record, which I believe is their fifth. And across this LP, I hear a lot of different things, like the heaviness and fuzziness of a King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, but also simultaneously the lushness and the color that you might get on a Tame Impala LP. There are even some slight Britpop vibes on the track Bob Holiday. Microwave Dave even hits with this very subtle and eerie Flaming Lips style sound. So yeah, I'll say stylistically and aesthetically to a degree, this thing is versatile. I will give it that, but as I went through the entire record, I just found the vocals and the songwriting were just not really sticking with me. I think Porn Crumpets' approach to Psych is maybe a little too general than I would like, because I just failed to see what exactly makes them stick out among all the other bands working right now. I mean, don't get me wrong, the performances and the production on this thing are very solid. It's a listenable record, but does it stand out in such a way where I would like put them at the top in some of the current bands in this field? Not necessarily. This is the sophomore LP from this West Coast singer-songwriter, which I was very excited to listen to given the versatility of the singles that led up to it, giving us bits of lo-fi indie and dream pop and groove metal and even industrial rock. But listening to the entire thing, it becomes very apparent that while Sasami has a lot of different sounds, a lot of different interests, a bit of a jack of all trades artistically, this record just does not really come together all that cohesively, nor are the performances and writing all that consistent across the album, because there are some real duds here. Her grip of certain styles and genres does seem to vary a bit from track to track, but where there's a will, there's a way, and maybe as Sasami continues to experiment and try different things, these gaps will close. Because I will say this, most of the songs here are eliciting very strong positive or even negative feelings from me, and that's saying something. You know, a lot of records personally just like don't have much of an effect and don't stop me in my tracks, but there is something to what this album is doing. When it comes to Midwest rappers who sound like they are talking over a beat more than they are flowing, a few are as witty or as hilarious as BabyTron is. And with Megatron here, there's something so immeasurably cool about him just kind of ranting in the way that he does over these 80s inspired instrumentals. But I would say my biggest issue overall with this project is that it's really just too much of a good thing. Because BabyTron lyrically, vocally, and even on the instrumental end does not really vary his style up much, if ever, really, and that does get tiresome. It's one-dimensional. Now granted, that one dimension is a good dimension, but it's still just the one. I will say, like, I know a BabyTron song when I hear one, but that's pretty much because I feel like I'm just hearing the one BabyTron song, just different variations of it. Latto coming through on this one with a really solid record here. I was kind of concerned as to how she would bounce back after the name change and that very promising XXL freshman performance. I'm not telling you there's anything mind-blowing about this project, but it is a tight and focused set of bops, which has me hoping that Latto is going to stick around for a while, because her flows, her big personality, as well as her ear for catchy bars and production makes her, in my opinion, a cut above of much of what's out there in the mainstream currently. Now, of course, is there a part of me that would maybe love to hear her in a more wild or a left field light artistically? Sure, but what she's doing works, and it works for her, and she's doing it pretty well. Another Omar Apollo record, and still after listening to this, after another one, I am struggling to hear what exactly makes him stand out as an artist. I mean, for one, there is the versatility. I mean, across this LP, you hear notes of indie rock and bedroom pop and R&B and neo-soul, but still, even though that variation is nice and it's there, I can't help but pick up on the fact that the production, average, very flavorless, the singing, average, the lyricism, average. Granted, I think this album is more listenable than the past one, where some of the performances were obviously shaky, but still at this point, if I came into a review of this record telling you like, oh, there's so many things exciting me about this project, I'd be lying to you, because there's just not, at least in my opinion. This Weather Station record, I feel like this is an album that I know internally how I should be enjoying it and how I should be appreciating it. There's a certain feel about a record of this style that is so quiet, so intimate, so hushed. But as I listen to this record over and over, I'm just not really being pulled in. There's not much about the piano playing, the songwriting, the vocal performances that are all that enthralling to me. I just was not really finding that dark and somber magic in this record that I was hoping for, despite desperately trying to dig for it at points. And personally, even though I was not crazy about the last Weather Station record, I think I appreciate the instrumental density of that project so much more. Cities Aviv, cloud rap pioneer, eventually making his way to much more abstract pastures, especially with his recent stuff. And I'll kick off my thoughts here by talking about the intro of the record, which I think is really compelling and kind of explains the modus operandi of the project so well, talking about how at one point there used to be so much more of an infatuation and an accessibility to jazz music in terms of like listening to it, understanding it, and also, you know, being able to, as a kid, playing it, because instruments and maybe music programs were more widely available. There was more economic support for that sort of thing. But with instruments growing in price and there being less access to that sort of thing, of course you're going to find people transitioning into new art styles that don't require a whole lot of money to get into, which explains, sort of the hip-hop angle that is discussed in this intro. And it's with that I think Cities Aviv explores the idea of, making abstract, psychedelic, very heady and introspective hip-hop songs like on the cheap and very simply with a lot of dusty, weird, obscure, jazzy loops and bellowing lead vocals and flows for days, but lyrics that kind of just touch down on a lot of different feelings and vibes, but without forcing them together into a super clear, coherent narrative much of the time. There's a lot of vivid emotions and colors across this record, but my biggest gripe with it is just it's so damn much. It is a long freaking album. Some of the tracks themselves are just massive, while others are just like really quick, fleeting thoughts that vaporize after a minute and change. But I suppose that is part of the appeal of this album, the weird, boundaryless, and almost random quality about it that makes it so compelling. So I will say, even though I'm not in love with this album, there is something about it that is supremely special. And if you guys are big fans of artists like Earl or Armand Hammer, stuff like that, but you wanted that feeling to kind of last the length of falling down an endless rabbit hole, then this may be your record. Shout out to Token on this new record over here. I know he's an artist that may be grating to some people, and maybe my fans have already kind of decided in their heads, oh, he's a rippity rap, lyrical miracle kind of rapper. He's uncool, he's whack, I'm not going to fuck with anything he does, no matter what. But I think he has displayed personally and artistically a lot of growth on this project. Like, as far as like the fast rapping and trying to like force an aggressive competitive flow down your throat, he's really toned down on much of that on this project. He's trying to make bangers. He's trying to make songs that are enjoyable for their aesthetics, not just for like what he's trying to perform for you flow-wise and lyrically. And on top of it, there are some really solid features on this thing too. And some of the cuts where he goes down a personal road don't come off as melodramatic as they once did on his previous stuff. So, again, while it's not perfect and it's not one of my favorite rap records of the year, I think this is a vast improvement over his last album. And I think truly and honestly makes him an artist to watch for people who may have been skeptical of his work before, if they maybe caught a song or like a freestyle or something like that, that just kind of came off in such a way that, yeah, that's not my thing, that's not my bag. But I think he is like trying to be a bit more nuanced and subtle in his approach and give the listener something that could appeal beyond what you may get out of like normally an Eminem record or something like that. But again, shout out to Token on this record, and I think it is a vast improvement over what he's done in the past, and hopefully he sticks with it and we see more growth into the future. Prog metal legends Meshuggah are back, with all those chunky, gented riffs, intricate drums, violent roars from Kidman on the vocal end. And while this thing is heavy, it is pummeling, it does hit hard. As I went further and further through it, it just kind of made me come to terms with the fact that, especially at this stage in their career, melodies and dynamics, as well as variation in color, they just don't factor in Meshuggah's world. They don't. And while, again, this thing is aggressive and it is heavy, I just feel like in so many ways it's not enough. And yeah, here and there are some awesome nuanced guitar passages. On the track Abysmal Eye, there are some atmospheric arrangements that surround the riffs too that are kind of nice. But still, even those moments leave me starving for like some real dynamics, for some real layers, for some real melodic details, some texture, because I really feel like what Meshuggah is doing, like the meat is there, it's just not very seasoned, which, like, I guess the band has never super been about that sound and about that life. I get it. But you know what, when we go back to records, classic records like Chaosphere, for example, there was a relentlessness and a ferocity to the performances on that record that, even if the sound was kind of simple and blunt, it kind of closed that gap. It made up for it. But the thing is, like, on this new LP, Meshuggah, it's just not as wild like that. There's almost like a measured sort of delivery to the riffs on this LP, even if they are very heavy and crushing much of the time. So yeah, unfortunately, I just kind of left this thing wanting more, a lot more. We have a new LP here from pianist and band leader, writer, and arranger, Mr. Robert Glasper and his Black Radio series. And yeah, I mean, this is pretty much everything that we've come to expect given the previous two installments. We have touches of soul and jazz and hip hop coming together, depending on who the guest features are on any given track, and that also tends to, like it has in the past, affect the vibe of the LP, maybe the quality of a given song as well. Because some of these tracks, like the Yebba song, for example, don't so much feel like focused, concise songs as much as they are motifs that they're kind of exploring over the course of however much time it lasts. But like, you know, very little on this thing extending out as far as to what you might call like a jazz style full-on improvisational jam, which I guess that maybe kind of displays why I'm so on the fence with releases like this from Glasper, because there are moments where I hear ideas where I'm thinking like, yeah, I'd love to hear this like extended out and jammed on and pulled on, but then simultaneously there are moments that I would love to hear just kind of delivered in a more concise way and kind of sculpting whatever song it is or idea they're delivering to where it just hits a little bit harder, it snaps. But still, regardless of whether or not Robert is scratching either of those two itches in a deep way, there are a lot of very special guest performances on this thing. Great piano across the record, very classy, clear, beautiful production, and yeah, just a cool crossroads of influences across the LP too. You know, Robert Glasper continues to be a very special artist, and you know, it's because of releases like this that's the case. We have the second installment of Health's Disco 4 series. If you remember the last record in, you know, Disco 4, pretty much that entire LP was just a series of collaborations with a lot of different artists from, we have left field bits of pop and rock and industrial and so on and so forth, noise too. And yeah, that's pretty much the vibe they keep on this next installment while bringing in names and faces like Trent Reznor and Poppy and Ada Rook, the list goes on. Just like with the original Disco 4, it is a mixed bag, and that is dependent on whether or not the guest's sound kind of complements Health's sound, or whether or not the song or the idea forged within the track is all that stand out. So yeah, it varies. It's a mix, just like the last LP, but still, it is an interesting project overall, and it is really cool to hear Health crossing over with all these artists. I mean, you know, there is kind of a curiosity, especially when it initially dropped for me, given all the names involved, but I didn't really find myself going back to it all that often once I had heard it. New Fontaines D.C. record here, which I'm having a lot of the same issues that I did with the last album, honestly, even if the production this time around is a little bit better. And that problem being, like, the band has a very solid rock and post-punk sound, and they really kind of come in very dramatic often with the vocals and the rhythm section and the guitars, and it's steady. It's kind of hitting you with a bit of a hypnotic vibe with how repetitious it is, but the lack of progression and passion and solid musical ideas across the length of any given song on this record kind of makes each track here feel like it's just growing stale slowly. It's a bath that's getting colder and colder and colder. And again, I guess that continues to be my issue with Fontaines generally. You know, things start off solid, but then the longer it goes, kind of the less I want to be there. Luna Lee, massive talent. I have sung her praises before as a multi-instrumentalist, a singer, a songwriter, a producer. This is kind of her big outing into a record with like full-length songs and verses and choruses and so on and so forth. And yeah, you know, despite the fact that I have enjoyed her talents quite a few times before in a variety of different like viral videos and beats and stuff like that, I feel like a lot of that isn't translating over as hard as she is kind of moving into more, you know, mature and structured songwriting. But, you know, given her talents with all that other stuff, maybe it's just kind of a matter of time to kind of strike that balance to where the verses and choruses are hitting hard, the vocals are displaying as a bit stronger. There are tracks on this thing like Alone But Not Lonely, for example, that like really could have used a part B or an alteration or a variation of some sort. But still, on the best moments of this LP, I hear this very bright, shiny, fun and intoxicating, almost like Japanese breakfast type quality to what Luna Lee is doing. And hopefully she, you know, at one point can hit that and also, you know, go above and beyond. Because it seems like, again, with this project, like the songwriting and the ability to deliver those songs with clear and coherent production is more the focus. And I think that, you know, it's a process. We're not quite there yet, but certainly on the way. The voice is back, continuing through his recent career renaissance with another record, and honestly sounding good doing it. I mean, there's nothing on this LP that you wouldn't expect from Durk at this point. We have vengeful Chicago drill cuts, we have very moody and introspective auto-croon cuts, a variety of tracks that kind of strike a balance between those two, and yeah, the production and the vocal delivery and the effects used as well can run a little generic, that's true. But still, there's a real depth and urgency to much of what Durk is saying on this project. Some of his best choruses ever happen on this record too, like No Interviews. And look, I know my audience generally is pretty picky when it comes to, you know, rap in this style, but I think this is one of his best records so far. Yeah, there are ways in which vocally and lyrically I wish Durk stood out a bit more. But in these tracks, there's still a lot of focus and passion to the way he delivers his story and delivers his experiences, and I think that's worth something. Like, say what you will about the guy, what you can't take away from him is that he truly does wear his emotions on his sleeve on pretty much any given track. Slowcore legends Duster return with a surprise April 1st release, and it's very much a sad, simple, slow, low-key, stripped-back kind of rock record that, while it's okay, I feel like I really, truly have to be in the mood for something that is just trying so little to have any kind of impact or intrude or grab my attention in any way whatsoever. Like, again, there's a mood there, there's a vibe there. But when it comes to music that is this slow and this subtle, there are so many more other artists and records that I prefer to listen to simply because maybe there's like a bit more tension to the progression, or there's, you know, subtle but still like more layers musically or instrumentally to what's going on here. Whereas Duster obviously prefers to keep it very quiet, very bare, very simple, and there's merit to that approach. But I'm just not really getting a whole lot out of it personally, especially in this most recent instance here. But hey, you know, I know there are some people who are loving the record, so if you're digging it, you're digging it. Position, have you given any of these albums a listen? Did you love them? Did you hate them? What would you rate them? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like, please subscribe, and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well, over here next to my head. As usual, it is that link to subscribe to the channel. Yeah, you should do that. It'll be good for you. And I'll see you in the next one. Anthony Fantano, YUNOREVIEW, forever.